the refugee problem is getting bigger and bigger. We can't stop it immediately, and migration will happen whether or not we want it to.
Being a refugee is not pleasant, and I think sometimes we forget to understand or even comprehend how long and how hard the journey can be.
These are people who just want to rebuild their lives really quickly. They don't want to take from anybody else. They don't want to be on social assistance one day longer than they have to.
I think that simply knowing a refugee or two would completely change anyone who has that perspective. I have not known a dangerous refugee.
My name's Sally. I am currently studying at the University of Toronto, doing my 5th year, and I'm doing a double major in international relations and peace, conflict, and justice, and minor in history.
Okay, so we're here because we want to talk to you a little bit about your story. We do understand that you have a story that needs to be told, a refugee narrative that the world needs to hear because it is a global crisis. So just give us a rough background as to your journey. What motivated you to, or your family, to actually have to move to Canada? What were the circumstances around having to migrate here?
Yeah, so our journey was excessively long. So we were born, me and my family were all born in Iraq and Mosul, and we had to leave in 2006 because, of course, of the conflict and religious prosecution. So we ended up leaving to Syria because that's the closest country to Iraq, you know. But again, we weren't able to stay there for a very long time. It wasn't able to host the number of refugees fleeing from Iraq. And so we left to India and a year after, so in 2007. And we stayed in India for 7 years before, while we were in India, we applied to be refugees, and we waited for 7 years before we got to Canada in 2014.
Well, that sounds like a long journey, but what were the hopes of your family? And as you were journeying through all these countries from Syria to India and then finally China, what were the expectations? I understand that you were fleeing from conflict in Iraq at the time, but just tell us exactly what the fear was and what the hope for your family was as you were transitioning into the pursuit of a better life.
Yeah, so there's a lot of personal background why we had to flee, but most importantly, I think what it is that we were threatened, and in a way, and not a very humanitarian way. And in fact, we were threatened by conflict, but more specifically, we were threatened because of certain things like refugees, language or religion, and so. What happened was, again, very, very personal. Well, my uncle was kidnapped, and we were threatened personally that we were going to get kidnapped if we don't leave. And so we had to leave on the night off, which wasn't very pleasant. We didn't take a lot of things. We didn't think we were going to go for a very, very long time, but we had to. We have no option, just like any refugees right now globally, they have no option of going back. There is no option. And so our hope was to gain the security, to gain safety from conflict, from religious prosecution, and that's really, that's my family's hope. It's just to be somewhere where we weren't threatened anymore, and that led us to basically leaving from one country to the other until we finally got to Canada.
How was it having to navigate moving through different countries with a family that was essentially threatened and fearful of their life?
Yeah, so it's really hard. So my family consists of my parents and my sister, my younger sister, and we left overnight basically with a taxi driver because we couldn't put anyone else in danger, any of my extended family in danger, to drive us all the way to the Syrian border. But our decision to leave later was, again, just really my family doing some research. And the reason we fled to India, and I know I get a lot of questions on why did you choose India out of all the other countries, to be very honest, it's a financial burden to leave a country. It's not that easy. You have a responsibility and you only have a certain amount of money. And then the other thing is you can't work. Where do you work? Like when we fled to Syria, they were already overcrowded with refugee population from Iraq and other countries. My parents weren't able to find a job. And so India was basically our cheap escape. because again, we didn't have the money to survive in any other country. And so that's how we made a decision. But it was just, the whole time it was just me and my family, and it was very very disheartening that we left so many family members behind, my extended family. But again, as I said, it's a financial burden. We couldn't get everyone to come with us. I wish we could. They're still there struggling, and I wish we could do more to prevent that struggle, to bring them to different countries. But it's not that easy. It's a process.
And you talk about having to move to India and not having the opportunity to get jobs or even find means to sustain your family at the time. So when did the ray of hope, if any at all, come? Like when was your family at the time able to start, I guess, maybe taking care of themselves? Or was it still a constant fear and not knowing what's going to happen the next time and where the next meal is going to come from? Like, what was the situation in India?
So it's very complicated, living in a country with no papers to justify who you are as a person, and that's what we left with. We left with no papers, no any sense of identity except for our passports, and that's very hard when you're applying to be a refugee in India, and we faced that challenge. And at the same time, I covered a little bit about the financial stuff. And not going to lie, we never had hope. I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. We were always struggling. We didn't know where. I didn't feel the struggle as much as my parents did, but we didn't know where the next meal was going to be. We rented a very small apartment. It was a 1-bedroom. All 4 of us stayed in the 1-bedroom with a kitchen. And what finally happened, and what kind of gave us a little bit of hope. It's not a very good thing they gave us hope, but my sister, she got the wrong vaccine in Iraq, and that's very, very common thing when conflict occurs in countries, is people get the wrong medical prescriptions, they get the wrong vaccines. My sister got the wrong one, and she got epilepsy as a result of that, but the epilepsy, she didn't get it until 8 years after she got the wrong vaccine. And so she was around 7 at that time. And epilepsy is very hard to deal with. And so it's very hard. It was very, very difficult. But that, I think, was the end. That's when my parents were like, you know what, like, we can't live like this anymore. Like, we have to get to a country where it's not only safe for us, but it's also a country where there are opportunities, where we can go to school, where we can get an education, where my parents can get a job. And yeah, so that I think that incident gave us, or pushed us a little further to actually to do more, to be able to go to a country where we can't. I don't even know how to explain it. It's very, very hard. But you're seeing someone so close to you, so sick, and you just want to get them somewhere where they're safe, where you feel safe, where you can support them. And I think the most painful thing is not being able to support your loved ones, because you can't support yourself, and so that's what pushed my parents to apply to be refugees, because we understood that we no longer can just sit around and wait one day for our country to be safe so we can go back to our country, or live all of our life being tourists in India. We had to find a home for ourselves, and yeah.
And so what was that process like, having to officially decide to apply to be a refugee? At that point in time, did you understand what being a refugee was? Because again, you were very young at the time. Did you understand what it meant at that point to be a refugee, and what the connotations around being a refugee at the time was, and what the struggle, even in the application to become refugees in India, what the struggles were?
Yeah, so I did not understand this as much as my parents did, of course. I knew that there was something, and when we applied to be refugees, we had to do regular interviews with the UNHCR, and those interviews were it was traumatizing, because they would talk to my parents, but not me and my sister, because we were kids, so we were left alone in a separate room waiting for my parents. And just going in the building was so, it was very scary, because that's your future. You get a yes or you get a no, and that's your future. And the process was very, very long. That's why we waited 7 years. You get a certain card of identity, and then you get a green card, and then they transfer your papers over to whatever country you decide to go to, or whatever country is accepting refugees at that time. And so I did not understand as much as I do now what it meant to be a refugee back then. But my parents did. My parents struggled. We had to go very regularly and remind the UNHCR that we are waiting here. My sister is sick. We can't afford to treat my sister. And my dad was also sick. And we needed to get somewhere safe where we can at least just be able to provide the medical necessities for them. And so that constant reminder, my parents, of course, had to go through. And it's painful. But it just goes back to your question. Maybe I did not understand the characteristics of what it means or how hard it was to be a refugee because we were protected by my parents. But my parents talk to me now and made me understand how hard the process was. And now I do understand that it's a struggle and it's a difficult one because your whole identity is under question. You were denied your basic human rights by your own country and now you're in search for them. But yeah, and it leaves you wondering, do you even have to search for your human rights because they were given to you when you were born? And so it's very unfortunate.
So now looking back, obviously you've contextualized it very well for us, that migration can be hard emotionally and even physically and even health-wise, like you've mentioned your sister and your father were having some medical conditions as well. Now looking back, how do you think for yourself and for your family, how this process has changed you and your family?
So it's definitely brought us closer because we had to be supportive of each other. It's a very difficult process, but at the same time, we're grateful. We're grateful every day. And the reason for that is it's hard to be grateful because we're still facing so many challenges even after being here. But we have to be grateful because we look back at how far we have become as a family. Just a few years ago, not too long ago, 13 years is not that much time. We were facing threats. We were, we were facing conflict. We saw so much violence that I think the amount of violence I personally saw, and I'm just 23, is more violence than any adult person has seen. And it's very unfortunate that that has to happen. My parents tried to protect us, but there's only so much you can do. And it has definitely, I would say, brought us closer together. Being a refugee is not pleasant, and I think sometimes we forget to understand or even comprehend how long and how hard the journey can be.
So now take us through the part of the journey in coming to Canada. What was the breaking point and what was the process in having to, again, move from one country to another in the pursuit of your self-identity?
So self-identity is, that's something I always reflect on because refugee has become a big thing of my identity, a big part of my identity, a big part of who I am, because I did mention that when we left Iraq, we had no documents of who we were. And we were given a lot of trouble for that. Even when we were applying to the UNHCR to provide us some documents of who you are, and all we had was a little passport with a picture and our names. That's literally all it is. We didn't have a birth certificate, and so so when we had to leave India, we were of course we were happy. We waited 7 years to find a home, but the process coming to India was very stressful. Coming to Canada was very, very stressful. I still remember the day we were interviewed by the embassies to be given our visas or to say the final yes or no for our papers after already waiting 6.5 years, and it was Christmas Eve. That's when our interview was. And we were, I'm not going to lie, we walked into the embassy and there were people yelling during the interviews, there were people crying outside, and it was so, almost we walked in and I just had this thought that I don't think we were going to make it because I don't think our case was good enough to make it. And it's sad now that I had to question whether our case was good enough to be refugees. But it was a shock. It was a cultural, as you can hear from every refugee story, there is a cultural shock. There's just, you're in a new country, you have to adapt yet again. And again, there's this part of your identity. So when people usually ask me where I'm from, I'm so hesitant because I was born in Iraq, but then I spent most of my adulthood in India, and then I'm here now. So, and I just became Canadian citizen in December 2018. So what do I say? I usually just look at them and I'm like, what kind of answer do you want to hear from me? Because in reality, I think that's a lot of refugees too will say the same thing. They say, I don't associate with my country of birth because I was stripped of my rights there. But at the same time, I don't associate with India as much because it was a house, but it wasn't a home for me. And Canada is just becoming home now. But you have, it's a process, it's a building blocks. Like, to make a country your home, there are just so many things that go into it. And so identity-wise, it's always a struggle for me, and I think it's a struggle for my family too, but we have just come to slowly develop where we want to go. Yeah.
And why you think it's important to invest in the lives of refugees?
So I usually, when I get asked this question, and usually when I talk about the lives of refugees, I give an example that my parents invested 13 years in me, and this is where I am. And so just imagine what would happen if other countries would actually invest in refugees. And I think it's important because it's more than just a survival kit. You know, it's not you just provide a refugee with survival kit and you forget about it because you did your good deed for today. It's lives of millions, and that's what's so difficult to understand, is that there are millions of refugees, millions of people displaced around the world because of something we have created. You know, it's conflict is not something that's driven by some anonymous thing. It's humans being. It's driven by states. It's driven by a lot of people, and so I think it's very important to invest back in people, to invest in their education, to invest in their health, because we are human beings just like anyone else, and it's hard for me to explain that because a lot of the time when we talk about refugees or the work we do as states or as countries, we try to talk more to policymakers without actually talking to refugees themselves, without understanding the need of refugees. And so I think the first step is that we have to understand what are the needs of refugees and how can we invest in for them to thrive. We have to create an accepting community. We have to create a community that's willing to put a little bit of effort. And by effort, I don't mean it's only monetary funds. It's also just having a welcoming community where people can thrive. You know, I was lucky enough to come to U of T to be able to study and understand the long process of being a refugee, to understand international affairs, and not a lot of people are supported like that. Not a lot of people are given these opportunities. Language barriers, one very, very good example of why a lot of people don't decide not to go on with education. We have to invest in programs that are accessible for refugees, and that's really the best way I can say it. But again, just taking an example, 13 years of my parents' investment, and I'm here talking to you, and I find myself very, very lucky. Now imagine if just states would put some years of investment into each refugee, we would have a much better world, a more accepting world, and to be honest, a kinder world, just to each other. And so I think it's a long process, but it's a very important one for sure.
My name is Mike Morantz. I'm Executive Director of Matthew House Refugee Center, and I've spent the first part of my career as a minister in churches throughout Ontario, but built a parallel career in the nonprofit community, doing a lot of work in poverty issues, housing, working with people with addictions and mental health issues. I joined Matthew House as Executive Director about 2.5 years ago, knowing actually very little about refugees, didn't know the difference between refugee and refugee claimant, certainly didn't know the struggles that refugee claimants face. And it's been very eye-opening, heartbreaking, but also inspiring as I've seen the men, women, and children rebuild their lives here in Canada and get established in their own homes and jobs and cars. So I'm loving every minute of it. Really, everybody knows a refugee is somebody who has fled their home country because of fear of violence, persecution, war. Refugee claimants did not have a hearing in a refugee camp, did not get determined to be a convention refugee elsewhere. But because of Canada's commitment to refugees under the Geneva Convention, they arrive in our country and we give them a hearing here. And we have a world-class system that has multiple streams, one specifically for refugee claimants, but there is a backlog on a hearing, and those refugee claimants are not entitled to any federal government settlement supports when they arrive in Canada until they've had a successful hearing. which means unlike government-assisted refugees, privately sponsored refugees, who have somebody to meet them at the airport, have somebody to help them find housing, get winter clothes, find a job, language classes, counseling, all of that stuff, refugee claimants are left on their own and often end up in our general homelessness system and really struggle to rebuild their lives. Matthew House steps into that gap and becomes home and family. We provide them with whatever support they need to become self-sufficient contributing members of community as quickly as possible. That's our goal, to see them, within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, be in employment, education, starting their own business. And we see amazing results from that. I was sharing with you earlier, from the point that our refugee claimants get their work permit to the point that they're employed, we're averaging about 10.2 days. And most of them are off of Ontario Works within about 3 months after that. They are really hungry and just want to very quickly rebuild their lives. They're not looking to steal anybody's job, steal anybody's health care, certainly not wanting to sit on social assistance. Most of our refugee claimants are out looking for work before they get their work permit, and many of them have found jobs and are just waiting for that work permit to come, and the moment that comes in the mail, they call them up and say, I'm ready to work, let's go.
Now, we recognize that the refugee story is a story that has to be told. It definitely needs the global awareness.
And it has to be told by them.
And it has to
and
be
that's
told
the hard part, because for them to tell their story is a hard thing. And I hope that somehow that is captured in your work, that if you get anybody on video, that is a courageous thing for them to do, to share their story, because first of all, they're having to relive it. And nobody wants to relive trauma. But second of all, reliving it in front of somebody else, reliving it on camera, that's a very big deal. And I don't think very many people would want to do that. So those who are willing to share their story deserve to be listened to even more, I think.
And now, what would you say about the misconceptions? Let's just address some of the misconceptions that are attached to refugees, because we do understand the narrative in many places that they are maybe dependent on the economy, they engage in social vices because of their struggles and just having to find a way to make a living for themselves when they are brought into a country where they had to flee into. So let's talk about some of those misconceptions, and let's just talk about what should be done, or what contributions that the general public should know, and what it would mean to invest in the life of a refugee as well.
Let me start by saying that I think some of the biggest causes of refugees in general struggling in their settlement in their new country is connected to the length of time that they're trapped in refugee camps. So refugee claimants, we have found, are very, very anxious to really quickly rebuild their lives. And I think in part because of how Matthew House and organizations like ours run our programming, that helps. But I think another big part is that they haven't been trapped in a refugee camp for a number of years. They haven't gotten discouraged. They haven't gotten used to somebody else taking care of them. They, in many cases, the men, women, and children, well, men and women who arrive at Matthew House, the day they left their home country, were running businesses, were teaching other people's children, were lawyers in offices, and they really quickly want to rebuild their lives. And we see that. I shared with you earlier how quickly they get a job once they get a work permit. And what's really neat is I think I have about 7 employers in this city now who are calling me all the time because they want to hire the men and women from Matthew House, because they recognize that these are people who just want to rebuild their lives really quickly. They don't want to take from anybody else. They don't want to be on social assistance one day longer than they have to. They want to rebuild their lives and get back to a place where they've got their own home, they've got the ability to take care of themselves and create a future for their children. As far as vices, in all honesty, I am surprised that I don't see more of it. right? I think if I went through some of the trauma that the men and women go through before they come to us, I probably would have started using drugs or alcohol. In 2.5 years, we've not had any problems with the people who have come through here with drugs or alcohol. They again are people who just want to rebuild their lives. They want to develop community. They want to be part of Canadian culture and community. They don't want to subvert it. They don't want to change it into what it was back home. They want to be part of our Canadian family. So if we can help refugees as quickly as possible develop new relationships, new supporting relationships, that becomes very healing. So really, to any Canadian, I would say this. If you can be a friend to a refugee claimant, you can change a life. If you can come alongside of them and journey as a friend for a few weeks, a few months, you can change your life. You can help them very quickly become self-sufficient, contributing members of your community. Or you can stand back with your arms crossed and you can watch them struggle. And maybe they'll succeed despite you, or maybe they'll fail. But wouldn't you rather have them succeed?
Well, my name is Ahmed Awad. I'm 30 years old. I'm originally Palestinian, but I was born and raised in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai. From there, I moved to the United States for school. I went to Western Kentucky University. I stayed there for 5 years. See, now here's where my story begins, in the United States mainly. And the very first day I was there, I went to Buffalo Wild Wings. You know, like, hey, let's have some wings. So I went there, and on the door, like, there's like an oval glass, so you can see who's coming out and who's going in, type thing. So I saw an older gentleman coming out. Typical, you know, southern dress, like with a cowboy hat, cowboy boots, the whole 9 yards. So, out of respect, he's an older guy, out of respect, I open the door and step to the side. And he looks at me and he goes like, "You're not from here, are you?" I was like, "Actually, no, I've been here less than 24 hours. You know, I'm excited. It's a new place, you know." And then he looks at me, "Where did you come from?" And I go like, "I came from the Middle East." And he looks at me. His first words is what got me. He was like, "So you're a terrorist?" And I was like, "No, I'm not. I'm further away from, like, I couldn't be further away from that. Like, I have nothing to do or associated with that. I don't like that type of stuff." And I just like walked in. And keep in mind, this was less than 24 hours me in the States. Now, me being in the South, in the United States, it was kind of hard for me. I was doing mechanical engineering, and I told you I stayed there for 5 years, right? It reached to a point where I was genuinely scared for my life. I stopped going to school. I stopped going out. At one point, me and my friends were sitting in a restaurant, and two of my friends, they were Saudi Arabians. And next thing you know, something plucked at my head. I was like, I thought it could be, you know, like a waiter who hit me with a tray by mistake. You know, things like that happen sometimes. So I was like, you know, I was like looking aside, and there was nobody next to me. So I was shocked. I look over, and next thing you know, it's one like the young kids who was sitting there threw a chicken wing at my head. And he started yelling, cussing me out. He was like, "Go back where you came from, you terrorists, you this and you that, and you this and you that." And it reached to a point where, like, I'm scared to go out because I'm scared genuinely for my life. I know I'm in America, and everybody has the right to carry. And if I reciprocate any hate from them, or if I reciprocate any foul language or anything whatsoever, he could just simply go like, "Hey, I'm protecting myself," that thing, you know? So I didn't want to stay in that environment anymore. So this is why I was like, you know what, it's time for me to pack up my stuff and head up north where it's kind of safer for me. I came here into Canada, everybody was welcome, which was to me, for the last 2 or 3 years in America, it was kind of hard under Trump's presidency. So it was like, you know, it wasn't a new thing, it was fresh for me. Okay, after 3 years of literally facing bigotry, facing hate, just because of who I am. I'm an Arab, I'm Muslim, my name is Ahmed. It's just like, people hate you without even knowing you, which is not fair for me or anybody else, you know? And so I came to Matthew House, and everybody was welcoming, of course, and whatnot. What Matthew House helped me with, they actually provided me with a family away from my own family. We were like literally one family. We eat sometimes together. We celebrate everything together. We respect each other. We never looked at each other in terms of color, race, ethnicity, culture. That never was an issue here. because I was living in the United States and I faced that daily, coming here and seeing this kind of people like who are genuinely trying to help you, going above and beyond, spending their own private time or their own free time to come to help you. I mean, that was kind of nice, you know. What Matthew House have helped me with, they helped me get all my papers in order, helped me with a roof over my head, you know, a shelter from the winter and everything. They helped me have the building blocks of a life. They started creating a life for me here. And for that, I think, is priceless. There's nothing that matches that to me right now. I'm struggling through my own life. I've been away from my family for 7 years. My sister, when I left, my youngest sister, she couldn't bear, like when she left, she was so young, she could barely speak a sentence by herself. Last time I spoke to her over the phone, she was speaking to me in full English, full sentences, full conversations. I've missed so much. And this is why Matthew House here means a lot to me. They gave me a family away from my own. I see kids around, reminds me of my little sister, you know. I see mothers taking care of their kids, reminds me of my own mom. I see fathers going out to work and try to provide for their families, reminds me of my own dad. It just gave me a sense of belonging, you know what I mean. And for that, I'm speechless for Matthew House. I can't thank them enough for what they do.
My name is Khalid Omar. I am originally Palestinian and I was born and lived my entire life in Saudi Arabia. So I was working, the last work that I worked with the international company, the name is Refugee, and I worked for 7 years as an operation manager. But literally when they changed the rules and everything, so now they call something that they call it Saudization, so which is they have to fire the foreigners and they have to hire the Saudis people. So I keep searching and looking for a different job or something, but I couldn't find. After that, they put me in system as escape. So in this time, I have to take a step that I have to move out rather than send me back home, which is to Syria, because I cannot go to Palestinian, because I have Syrian document travel. So I got the American visa for me and my daughter, and we traveled from Saudi Arabia to America. We stay for 6 or 7 days. After that, we fly to Buffalo. From Buffalo, we cross the border in waterfalls. After they ask us some question, they take the biometric and they take the story and what they can, how they can help us. They allow me and they say welcome to Canada. I came here first because I have relatives in Ottawa and in Mississauga, which is 2 uncles from my mother's side. But I decided to come to Windsor because I think maybe the process will go faster, better than the big cities. So that's why I moved here to Windsor. After 2 days, I joined Matthew House and they support me and help me a lot to fill my paper and document. After that, they give me a place to live with my daughter. And yeah, they whatever that I ask them, anything to help me or to support me, they are always there to help me, and up to date they are doing the same. Now actually I'm working, but still I'm waiting for my hearing to get the approval, then I can bring my family. Still I have my wife and 2 other kids with my wife.
Talk to us quickly about what it is to be separated from your family, your wife, your sons, and what goes through your mind every day.
Yeah, actually it's very hard to stay without my wife and kids, especially now my kids, they are growing, and sometimes thanks God that at least we have some apps to contact them. Otherwise maybe they will forget me. Even my daughter, she's missing her mommy. Sometimes that it happens once we arrive. Up to date, maybe once a week or twice a week that she's crying. She want her mommy, she want her brothers. Even for me it's not easy. Now I'm working, but most of the time I cannot manage the time because I have daughter also and I have to go to work, but I cannot work properly. Plus I cannot stay at home all the time because you know it's not easy to stay alone with your daughter. This is my first time that I stayed with a kid alone without my wife, because she usually you know the mom, they care about the kids more than dads. But I try my best and I hope that it won't take long time until my family will arrive and we stay together.
If you don't mind me asking, what were the circumstances surrounding you coming here with your daughter and then your wife in the sense staying? If you could just probe into
Yeah, actually because my wife, she's Syrian, so that's why I cannot bring the visa for her after Trump banning the Syrian country. So that's why only me and my daughter, she's 6 years old. we applied for the American visa and they gave it to us only. So that's why I decided maybe at least she can go to school here, she can explore the world, and maybe she can help me to make the process faster. So at least it won't take that long time. But now I'm almost a year, but till now still nothing happened. Hopefully that it won't take that long time more.
So can you tell us a little bit about what Adam House is?
So Adam House is a refugee home, and newly arrived refugee claimants to Canada come and stay here for a period of about 4 months. And while they're here, we help them with their immigration and refugee process, which can be very difficult to navigate on your own without professional help. And then we make referrals to legal aid, medical professionals, legal professionals, and community organizations that can help our clients, whatever they need.
What do you have to say to people who stereotype refugees as dangerous?
I think that my biggest wish for everyone would be that they would get to know a refugee. I think that simply knowing a refugee or two would completely change anyone who has that perspective. I have not known a dangerous refugee, and I've known over 2,000 refugees in the 18 years here, and would not characterize even one of them as dangerous. So I think just getting to know a person, understanding what they're fleeing from, and that they're just trying to, first of all, secure their own personal safety, but also to have hope in a future for themselves and for their family, if they have a family, or for their future family. So yeah, I think just getting to know people is the number one thing. We can't necessarily persuade anyone with an argument, but my challenge to Canadians and any country that receives refugees is get to know a refugee. Refugees come wanting to contribute. Refugees don't want to rely on a system, on a country, but they need someone to help build into them. For many of them anyway. Some may come ready to hit the ground running, but others need more time and energy from someone. And over the years, I have really enjoyed friendship with refugees. They have something to give also. It's not just that we're giving to them, but they want to give to us as well. They have generosity and a hospitable spirit that just wants to give back. And so I've really loved that part of my job, eating with people or just visiting their homes and seeing how they're doing. And some of the beautiful success stories that we've seen of people who have moved on and gone to school or started a business, and that to me just pays me back 1,000 times over. Sorry. And then as a country, as I mentioned, refugees don't want to come here and be beholden. They come to contribute to their own future and to the country's future. And they want to work hard, they want to pay taxes and do well. And so I think beyond the humanitarian part of it, we should be compelled to help people who are in difficult situations. It's also good for our country to include that diversity in our workforces, in our schools, and in our country.
All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is the Quaywar?
Right, okay, so I'm Ghanaian German. I was born and bred in Ghana. My parents were monks, they were yogis, and so we didn't have any formal education growing up. I've been homeschooled my entire life. As a hobby, I like to study behavioral economics, and for work, I consult on economic integration for refugees and migrants.
Tell us how you became involved working in that field, within that space.
Right, so in 2012, my father kicked me out of our home because I wanted to study medicine, and I became homeless for about 6 months. And fast forward a year after that, I went on to teach entrepreneurship in a refugee camp on the Ghana-Ivory Coast border, and I just got stuck. The situation was a lot of people who had several opportunities and then suddenly became displaced, and I saw a bit of myself in that I'd also been displaced, internally displaced from being homeless, and so I thought, okay, there's some similarities and I might be able to help them get out of the space that they're in. A lot of us just forget that migrants tend to bring more with them than they take away with regards to culture, lifestyle, expertise, and so on and so forth. And there's some prominent names that were refugees and or migrants, such as Einstein, and so on and so forth, and we forget that. And these misconceptions are reasonable because we don't learn a lot about refugees and or migrants. The first time I went in to teach in a refugee camp, I went with this messianic attitude of, I'm coming to save these people with my knowledge in entrepreneurship. And my first class had people who had PhDs in biochem and the like. I've forgotten, like a lot of people do, that they had lives before they became refugees.